Now, another thing that Imam al-Haythami says that Sheikh Walid al-Khadim mentions in his commentary, and this is really important, is that طول الأمل, this extended hope, what it is it's really a heedlessness about the reality of death, which he says is not a wrong action in and of itself. In other words, there's no commandment of wujub that you have to remember death, right? When the Prophet ﷺ said, أَكْثِرُ مِنْ ذِكْرِكُمْ هَذَا مَنْ لَذَّاتٍ, remember death, right? And he also said, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, كُنْتُ أَنْهَاكُمْ عَنْ زِيَارَةِ الْقُبُورِ فَزُورُوهَا فَإِنَّهَا تُذَكِّرُكُمْ بِالْآخِرَةِ. Right? I used to tell you don't visit graves, now I tell you go visit graves because it'll remind you of the akhirah. So the idea is that it's mandub to do a remembrance of death in the same way it's mandub to do dhikr outside of what's prescribed, like the prayers. أكثر من ذكري, يعني to do dhikr, يا أيها الذين آمنوا اذكروا الله ذكرا كثيرا. اذكروا there is fi'l amar, but it's an imperative, it's a command, but it's for nadab, it's not for wujub. You don't have to remember Allah as a fard. It's mandub, it's mustahab, it's encouraged to do it because it prepares you. So that is not a wrong action in and of itself. وَلِلتَّرَسِّرِ فِي جَمْعَ الْمَالِ هُوَ جَائِزٌ. And also, trying to make money, being out in the dunya, being active in your dunya, it's jaiz, it's mubah. Allah didn't tell you. He said, فَانْتَشِرُوا فِي الْأَرْضِ وَابْتَغُوا مِنْ فَضْلِ اللَّهِ. Travel in the earth, and seek the bounty of Allah. Meaning dunya, seek good things. Right? لِيَشْهَدُوا مَنَافِعَ لَهُمْ. Even on Hajj, Allah says you can go and have worldly benefit on Hajj. You can actually go and sell things on Hajj. There's nothing wrong. You can join dunya and akhirah on Hajj. You don't have to go purely, I'm only going, that's it. No, you can take things. You could take scents or books or whatever. I mean, now, I think it's limited what they allow through the thing. But it is permissible for the hujjaj on Hajj to bring merchandise and sell it. And there's people that shave people and make money. They bring razors and things like that. And they're hujjaj and they're making money. Nothing wrong with that. Our deen doesn't even frown upon it. You shouldn't say astaghfirullah. They're not spiritual people. That's not from our deen. There's nothing wrong with doing that. So he says that's permissible. Unless it was for tafakhur or takathur, right? Or litaswif at-tawbah. Then it becomes a kabira. Unless you were acquiring money in order to compete with others in a proud way, right? Or to hoard wealth and things like that as a way of accumulating massive wealth. Or taswif at-tawbah, putting off tawbah, right? يُرِيدُ الْإِنسَانُ لِيَفْجُرَ أَمَامَهُ. In يوم القيامة, it says about لا أقسم يوم القيامة لا أقسم بالنفس اللوامة أيحسب الإنسان أن نجمع عظام بلا قادرين على أن نسوي بنانه بل يريد الإنسان ليفجر أمامه يسأل أيان يوم القيامة. So there's your طول الأمل. Man wants to keep doing wrong in what's left of his life. And he says, when is the Yawm al-Qiyamah? It seems a long way off. He doesn't really think about it. And so, in the commentaries on that ayah, the ulama say that one of the meanings of that, يُرِيدُ لِيَفْجُرْ أَمَامَهُ يُسَوِّفَ تَوْبَتَهُ, to put off his tawbah. And this is what they call, in this culture, sowing your wild oats. Right? There's an idea in this culture that when you're young, and you've got energy to do ma'asi, get out and do as much as you can. Because you won't have energy to do those ma'asi when you get older. Right? This is a concept in American culture and European. Sowing your wild oats. And this is why Allah loves the young man who is in obedience. Because you get old, you don't have the energy to be disobedient to Allah. And you get some older people who had really bad lives when they were young, and then about 45, 50, they start thinking about that, they make tawbah, and then they become these self-righteous people that are pointing fingers at people. This is a problem. Religiosity. There's people that do that. They become, 50 years old. They've been doing all the worst things. They drank, right? They cheated. All these terrible things they did. And at 50 they realize, oh my God, I'm going to die. And then they start going to the masjid and become real righteous. And then they start pointing fingers at other people because they completely forgot about how they were, right? So, now, the next one is called tatayyur. And this is, it's a little bit difficult because tatayyur had a jahili concept, right? Which is called tiyara. And tatayyur, I mentioned this before, the Arabs, when they wanted to do something, they would go to a flock of birds. It was a type of divination. And that's why the word tiyara comes from tayr, which is a bird. And so they would go to a flock of birds and they would run at it. And if the flock went to the left, they took a bad omen. If it went to the right, they took a positive omen. If it went to the right, they called it a human. If they went to the left, they called it a sha'am. Which is why, the Muslim cosmology, if you're in the Arabian Peninsula and you face the sun, which is the natural in the morning for a man to wake up, look at the sun, Yemen is to the yameen and Sham is to the left, right? So you get that idea of human and sha'am, right? The Sham is the place of the left, and it's also called north, which is shamal, which is what we get shimal, which is left, and janub is from jamb, which is right side, because you recline on your right side. So the south is on the right side, the north is on the left side, which is also indicative in traditional cosmology that the Muslims always on their maps put the south on the top and the north on the bottom. And I can show you maps from the traditional books of Tawqeet, which was the Ilm al-Falak of the Muslims. All their maps of the earth show the south on the top and the north on the bottom, which is why I really think, and I've said this for a long time, Muslims need to make their own maps. And the reason that I realized this, I was in New Mexico years ago with Hakeem Archuleta, and we were at a flea market, and I found a compass, an old antique compass, and the guy, it was really cheap, and he said, there's only one problem. I said, what is it? He said, instead of pointing to the north, the arrow points to the south. And I said, that's fantastic. I thought that was great. And then we were walking away, and I said to my friend Hakeem, who knows a lot about science, why does it make any difference? He said, well, it's just a polarization. I mean, the paint's obviously just facing the south, because it's a istiqtab, right? Polarization. Isn't that right? And so I started thinking about this idea of the south and the north, and why do we always make the north the dominant thing? And then I saw a map that Al-Idrisi, the first map maker of the world, was Al-Idrisi, was a Moroccan who did a world map, and he put the south on the top, and he put the north on the bottom. The European map makers actually took from his book, but they realized the significance of putting the south on the top. It put Africa over Europe. And so they actually flipped it over and made their maps with the north on the top. And interestingly enough, if you read in the book called The Venture of Islam, Hodgson's points this out, how he said it's so unfortunate that the Muslims don't recognize that they made the first maps and they put the south on the bottom, and they should go back to putting the south on the bottom, because it's a completely Eurocentric worldview that actually does not have historical foundation. And so we should make maps that have Africa, right, on the top, and then Europe on the bottom. And we say, I'm going down to Europe and up to Africa, right? So we have to say, I'm going up to Los Angeles and down to San Francisco, because in Arabic you actually do say the south is up. In fact, they call southern Egypt Sa'id, which is upper Egypt. And northern Egypt is lower Egypt. Ihbitu Misra, go down to Egypt, right? And also in Libya, they say it as well. They say, Nas'ad al-Qibla, we're going up south, Wanzil al-Bahr, we're going down to the ocean, which is in the north. So this is traditional cosmology. And don't think this is insignificant, the impact that's seen maps all your life with Africa on the bottom. Yeah. And then the other thing about a southern map, nothing's over Arabia. That's another thing about it. If you look at a southern map, because I have one that was printed in Australia, because the Australians caught on to this. And they said, why should we be down under? And so they just turned it right side up, right? And they made their maps. I have a map from New Zealand that Ustada Besa sent me, because I told her about this and she sent me this map. And it's really interesting to look at it. It actually puts things in a very interesting perspective. Start seeing things like how close Ireland is to Morocco, for instance, and how close Germany is to England. You realize how strong the Germanic ties, because you don't get that sense when you see a northernly dominant map. So it's a very interesting thing. That's just a digression. from diseases of the heart. But I think that has some merit, about that. Anyway, that was about tatayyur, of making the birds go to the right or the left. So tiyara is it's just a superstition. But it's also more than that, because mutatayyir in the Arabic language is a pessimist. Mutatayyir is somebody who always sees the worst situation. No matter what, he's the one that's going to say, it'll never work. Right? They're pessimists. They always look at the worst. So he says, أَمَّا تَطَيُّرُ فَإِنَّ أَصْرَهُ مِنْ جَهْلِ أَنَّ الْأَمْرَ كُلُّهُ لَهُ. It's based on the ignorance that everything is Allah's. The affair belongs to Allah alone. Now for the Muslim, what does that mean? It means that you're going to have a good opinion of Allah. The non-Muslim has a bad opinion of Allah. The Muslim has a good opinion of Allah. And that's the difference. So you should always have this good opinion of Allah. Now, he says here, وَالظَّنُّ بَعْضٌ مِّنْهُ لَا يُبَاحُ كَالثُّوبِ مَنْ ظَاهِرُ الصَّلَاحُ. He's going into bad opinion. But I wanted to say one thing about tatayyur, which is that there are really two types of tatayyur. One is where it's based on normative. For people that are in the aqidah class, if you have a hukm adi, a empirical proof that things consistently happen. In other words, you get near a cobra, it bites you, you die. Then in that stage, you have to use your intellect. That's not tatayyur. That is a valid tatayyur, right? So if you see something harmful and by the hukm adi, it's harmful, you have to avoid it. That's what Khudayn says, if you don't, يُخْرِجُكَ عَنْ طُولِ الْعُقَلَى. You're not considered from the people of intellect. If you don't, you're a fool. Unless a person, there are people of Allah, like one of the tabi'een was walking with one of his students, and they came on a path. There was a lion a little ways down the road, and the student got frightened, and he said, go up on the high road. And he continued walking, and the lion didn't touch him. Right? So that's an example. People, certain ahwal or something like that, states that they have, but that's not for everybody to practice. Now, another thing Imam al-Qarafi radiallahu anhu says, a tatayyur is a bad opinion, and tiyara is the action that results from having that bad opinion. As long as the normative experience in which harm results from that doesn't occur, like walking under a ladder. Right? So in this culture, step on a crack, you break your mother's back. Right? And so when you were little kids, you avoid these cracks, right? Because it's a bad, or black cat, 13 years of bad luck. Breaking a mirror, right? Knocked wood. I've been healthy and then you knock wood. That is tiyara. And that's actually haram to do any of those things. On the other hand, if the Sharia gives us things to do, like to say, Bismillah alladhi la yadurru ma'a ismihi shay'un fil ardi wa la fis sama'i wa huwa as-sami'ul 'alim, those are things that you should do. Because there, it's not superstition, it's from revelation. But these things this is actually pagan, goes back to worshipping trees, and knocking on the wood, comes from that. They had sacred wood and things like that. So that's what a tiyara is. Or like for the Arabs, things like walking between two sheep, that was bad luck in Jahili Arab culture. Buma, to see an owl, right? To see an owl was a bad omen. Some cultures, to see a shooting star was a bad omen. Things like that, Those are all types of tiyara. Now, the Prophet ﷺ said in a hadith also that you'll never be free from tatayyur. In other words, it's a human nature. And there's a book by a skeptic, Michael Shermer, called Why People Believe Weird Things. And a lot of it is about that. He's explaining, how we really do have all these superstitions that are part of our nature. And that hadith indicates that, right? So there's people, they have to read the astrology before they go out on that day. There's people that won't buy stocks or sell stocks until they talk to their astrologer. Completely absurd premise. But they believe in it, and it gives them this thing. There's people that consult the I Ching, the Chinese I Ching, before they'll do anything. There's people that do ramal in the desert, Sahara Desert, things like that. People that flip coins or throw into wishing wells. These are all really part of human nature. So when the Prophet ﷺ said that there's ثَلَاثَ لَا بُدَّ مِنْهُنَّ, there's three things that you're going to get in your life. One of them is tatayyur. And then he said, فَإِذَا تَطَيَّرْتَ famdi. The way that you cure it is that if you feel that bad omen, just keep going. So if you see, for us in this culture, if you see a ladder and you're about to walk under it, and then that tayyara comes to your heart, you just keep walking. But that's the way you break it, right? And if the plant falls on your head, no, I'm just kidding. But that is the way you break it. You just ignore it and keep going, right? And a friend of mine who has a strong iman, he somebody who claimed to be like this wali or something like that, that he didn't really think should be making those claims, and said something about it. And these people said to him, don't you know, if he makes dua against you, he can destroy you. And so he said, let's make dua right now against me. I want you to make dua against me. Because what he was trying to show them was that's not the way Muslims behave. Muslims don't make dua against each other if they're real Muslims. And certainly a wali is not going to do that. And if he is a real wali, Allah will give you trouble, right? Without him wanting it, right? And there's a Sheikh I know in Mauritania, Muhammad Zain, who you met. Muhammad Zain, it's known that people that speak bad of him or have bad, he's from the family of the Prophet ﷺ, and he's a very righteous man. And he would never do anything to harm anybody, but people have been known that have bad attitude towards him or something like that they have trouble. So you don't want to mess with the awliya. But then on the other hand, like the Moroccans say, don't belittle any Muslim because he might be a wali of Allah. In other words, you should just be aware of Muslims in general, of harming other Muslims. It's not a good thing to want to do. So that's the idea of tiyara. And then the next one is the bad opinion of others. So he says, وَالظَّنُّ بَعْضًا مِنْهُ لَا يُبَاحُ كَالسُّوبِ مَنْ ظَاهِرُ الصَّلَاحُ. Dhann is suspicion. It's also opinion, conjecture. It's where you think something without having any facts to support it. It's a dhann, right? Now, the worst bad opinion is having bad opinion about people who outwardly they have righteous appearance and behavior. And appearance was something that the early Muslims actually considered important as well. In other words, although they say beware of people who you might think have a bad appearance, because sometimes they're just, Allah's veiled them. But they have what's called al-wasma. The Arabs have something they call wasma, which is wasim. Wasim is somebody who has a good face. Like when the Arabi came to Rasulullah and left, they asked him, what do you think of him? He said, Laysa wajhuhu wajhut kadhab. His face isn't the face of a liar. And this is called firasa. Having the ability to see in people's faces a goodness or a badness that's actually manifest in the face. And so having a bad opinion of somebody who has this wasma, outwardly they appear to be a righteous person, that's a bad type of dhann. وَإِنَّ بَعْضَ الظَّنِّ إِثْمٍ, Allah says. Some of dhann is wrong action. And this is important because generally the heart you're not taken into account for. But there's a ghiba of the heart. And that is to have a bad opinion of somebody that's unfounded. That actually is written against you. So that's really important. It's called ghibat al-qalb. And that's something, it's not like you see, Allah doesn't take into account for what occurs to your heart. He takes you to account for what there's azam, what continues. Azam is written against you in the heart, right? We'll go into that when we get to the khawatir, because there's degrees, right? Hajis, azima. There's degrees of thought levels. Hadithun nafs. And azima is the highest degree. And that is what's written against you. Dhann in the heart, if you actually do believe it, and it causes you to have an effect on your behavior towards that person, it's considered ghibat al-qalb. And it's actually a ghiba in which a second person is not involved. It's between you and your own heart. And that's not permissible. That's why he's saying, minhu la yubahu. It's not permissible. It's actually written against you. And then he said, ay aqtu qalbika. So it's azima. It's aqtu qalbika. Your qalb, it means your heart is convinced and you've judged him based on your heart's suspicions without a proof that warrants such assumption. You don't have a dalil for it. So somebody says, why don't you like that person? He says, I just don't, my heart tells me something's wrong. Now obviously, and we'll go into that in a second about following the heart about certain things, right? And the hadith which is muttafaq alayhi says, إِيَّاكُمْ وَالظَّنَّ فَإِنَّ الظَّنَّ أَكْتَبُ الْحَدِيثِ. Beware of bad opinion because it's the most treacherous or the most false of speech. where there's no dalil. You say to somebody, do you know so-and-so? He's a really bad person. And you say, what's your proof? I just know he is. Right? That's aktabul hadith. That's a lie. Because you have no dalil. And our sharia is based, umirtu an ahkum bil zawahir. I was commanded to judge people in outward matters. Right? So it's really important to look to the outward and see the behavior and things like that. And then he says, لا إثم في الشك ولا من استند لسبب فلم يكن مجردا. There's nothing wrong with having doubts about someone or having a bad opinion of him if it is based upon sound reason and it is not without evidence. So this is a really important distinction. The difference between shak and dhann is you have made, when you have your scales, right? Shak is where both the scales are balanced. Is he good? Question mark. Is he bad? Question mark. That's shak. I've got doubt about that person. What that means is, I don't know. And I have to be wary because I just don't know. That is not haram. Dhann is where you make the decision without proof that he's bad. Does everybody understand? This is a really important difference that'll help you in life. So, now how do we deal with people that we do get these feelings of doubt about? The first thing, if he is a fasiq, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, إِن جَاءَكُمْ فَاسِقٌ بِنَبَإٍ فَتَبَيَّنُوا, and in a riwayah sab'iyah, فَتَثَبَّتُوا. If a fasiq comes to you, find out whether what he said is true or not true before you take it. So if somebody who's known to do kaba'ir, a fasiq is somebody who does kaba'ir openly, or is mutahawan with sagha'ir, openly and consistently. He's always doing lesser wrong actions without any care about them. All right? So, that person is a fasiq. If they come to you telling you something, you can't take that at face, you cannot take it at face value. You have to find out whether it's true or not. Now, if you have doubt about a person, about his badness, shak. What Sidi Ahmed Zarruq says is, and this is really good advice, even though it's coming from the 9th century, it's actually more pertinent in the 15th century, and that is, لا تؤمن أحدا على دينك أو أهلك أو مالك حتى تجربه ألف مرة. Don't trust anybody with your deen, your family, or your wealth until you've tried him at least 1,000,000 times. No, alf, 1,000 times. I mean, that's called hyperbole. It's mubalagha. What he's saying is you better test them and see if they're true and sincere or not. If you don't know, don't trust them. One of the poets said, he said, حُسْنُ الظَّنِّ فِي الْأَيَّامِ مَنْقَصَةٌ فَظُنَّ شَرًّا ثُمَّ كُنْ مِنْهُ عَلَى وَجَرِ. A good opinion in these days is foolishness. So think the worst of people and then be on guard. And seriously, that is what the ulama all say. When the period that you're in is full of corrupt people, then the best position is to be distrustful of people. It's not dhann, right? It's just that you are distrustful of people. You don't trust people until you've really tested them. Just because there's so many people that it's a time like that. People don't have taqwa. They'll cheat you. They'll come out to you smiling and tell you, what wonderful Muslims they are and this and that, and they cheat you, right? And it happens all the time. And that's why the ulama all about zakat, time is bad, it becomes an obligation on distributor of zakat to check out the people's situation. They can't just give them zakat. If it's a good people, if most of the people are good, then in those situations you believe people. But when you get corrupted times and people, and somebody comes and says, brother, I've got 5 children, I don't have any money, then it's a responsibility for you to go find out if their claim is truthful. And they can't get upset or angry about that. They have to accept that it's not for you. It's like in this culture they say, well, the bad ones ruin it for the good ones, right? Sorry we have to do this, but we've been cheated so many times. That's the type of situation. They have to be told, unfortunately, because we've been tricked, and this is an amana from Allah. We really need to find out whether your situation is as you stated. It's not that we don't trust you. It's just this is a blanket policy for everybody for that reason, and that's unfortunate, but that is the reality of it. So that is bad opinion of others. So having doubts about people, there's nothing wrong with that. And then a bad opinion of a person who there's ample evidence that he's a bad person. That's just common sense. On the other hand, do not, if people make tawbah, then don't hold their past. And one of the worst things you can do is remind people of the past evil that they've done. That's a really bad thing to do to people. You should always not remind people of the past. You should really let people, let go of their past. Don't you hold on to it, because it's unfair to other people. And then there's another hadith also that says, خَصْلَتَانِ مَا أُوتِيَ الْمُؤْمِنُ خَيْرًا مِنْهُمَا حُسْنَ الظَّنِّ بِاللَّهِ وَحُسْنَ الظَّنِّ بِعِبَادِ اللَّهِ. A good opinion of Allah and a good opinion of the servants of Allah are two things that no mu'min was given better than it. So generally it's good to have a good opinion, certainly of Allah, and generally of the slaves of Allah. Now one of the things that Ibn Umar said is, مَا ضَرَّ عَبْدًا حُسْنَ الظَّنِّ. No servant was ever harmed by a good opinion, whereas a bad opinion can harm you. So generally, it's better to have a good opinion of people until proven, by Sharia, it's called Bara'at al-Asliyah. People are innocent until proven guilty. So you should not assume that people are guilty until really there's ample evidence of it. The other thing that's really important, opinion of Allah. There's a hadith in Tabarani, أَنَا عِنْدَ الظَّنِّ عَبْدِي بِي فَلْيَظُنَّ عَبْدِي بِيَ مَا شَاءَ. I am in the opinion of my servant, so let my servant think whatever he wants of me. And then there's another hadith that clarifies that, which says, أَنَا عِنْدَ الظَّنِّ عَبْدِي بِي, right? فَمَنْ ظَنَّ بِيَ خَيْرًا وَجَدَ خَيْرًا وَمَنْ ظَنَّ بِيَ شَرًّا وَجَدَ شَرًّا. Whoever, I'm in the opinion of my servant. If he thinks good of me, he finds good, and if he thinks evil of me, he finds evil. And that hadith is essential to understanding something really important, which is the other hadith, which is in the 40 hadith of Imam Nawawi, in which he says that every servant has what he deserves. And then he said, فَمَنْ وَجَدَ خَيْرًا فَلْيَحْمَدِ اللَّهِ. If he finds good, let him thank Allah. وَمَنْ وَجَدَ غَيْرَ ذَلِكَ فَلَا يَلُمَنَّ إِلَّا نَفْسَهُ. And whoever finds other than that, let him only blame his own soul. The idea here is that if you're a true mu'min, everything is going to be good for you. فَعَجَبًا لِأَمْرِ الْمُؤْمِنِ فَأَمْرُهُ كُلُّهُ خَيْرٌ. The affair of the mu'min, it's all good. And a true mu'min, you will believe that even the bad that happens to you is for a reason. There's good in it. And that's a different worldview from people who are the mutatayyir, the pessimist. He's going to look, and then we have sakhatul qadar. Why is this happening to me? I don't deserve this. What did I do to deserve this? Then when fall them, right, they, like the Prophet ﷺ said, that if you're not angry at me, right, I don't care. If you're not angry at me, then I'm not. وَلَكَنَ الْعَافِيَةُ أَوْسَعْ لِي. But the afiyah is more comfortable for me. I'd rather be in a situation where it's not so difficult, but the difficulty of the situation for the mu'min is still a good thing. And so that's having a good opinion of Allah and a good opinion of others.